Snake Eyes and Fire King are the two best decks in the format by a mile, but they're incredibly expensive. So today I'm going to give you the top 5 best budget decks to compete against those strategies. What's potion? You got Matt here, and welcome back to another competitive Yu-Gi-Oh video. Today we're talking about budget decks and how good they are in the current Snake Eyes and Fire King Tier 0 format. I want to make this video because right now, a single copy of Wanted, SP, or even Bonfire are more expensive than some entire decks in a lot of cases, which is absolutely insane. So I want to give you the 5 best budget decks that'll help you beat the Snake Eye Fire King meta for less than the price of 1 Wanted, 1 SP, or 1 Bonfire. So if you're excited for the video, then make sure to smash the like button. If this video hits 250 likes, I'll make sure to bring you a deck profile for one of the decks on this list. Also, if you like competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, including deck profiles, combo guides, meta discussions, and videos just like this one, you're gonna love this channel. So make sure to subscribe. But with that being said, here are the top 5 best budget decks for the February 2024 post-Phantom Nightmare competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. Let's jump into it. So before I start talking about what the top 5 best budget decks are and kind of going over what each of them do as a strategy, I wanted to go over quickly what constitutes a budget deck, because a lot of people will say, you know, a budget deck is $150 or $100 or $50. For me in this video, I'm going to be saying it's at about $100, which is going to be less than the price of 1 copy of SP, Wanted, or Bonfire. Now, obviously $100 may be a bit steep for some people, and that's okay. There are some decks that you can still play that are going to be at that $50 or below price range, and one of them is going to actually be on this list. Before I go any further, I wanted to give a very quick shout out to a deck that can be played budget, but is not going to be anywhere near as strong as it could be if you had the funds to make sure you can play it at full power, and that's going to be Branded Despia. The reason why is going to be that, well, number one, you need to have a copy of Guiding Quem, which is like a $40 card right now. You also would likely want to have 3 copies of Triple Tactics Thrust to play around something like Ash Blossom on your Branded Fusion, but obviously you can't afford those cards at the current price point that we've set. You also want to play Guardian Chimera and Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, and honestly, you can probably only afford just one of those 2 cards, and for right now, Albion is probably the better option, and that means you lose one of the best power cards, power plays in the deck in the Guardian Chimera pop 2 and draw 1. So just keep in mind, while it's a great deck, it just can't make this list even though you can play it in a budget sense. And as much as I love Branded Despia in this format against the Fire deck specifically because of the matchup they have against it, by missing out on some of these really powerful cards like potentially a 2nd copy of Quem or an Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, the Thrusts of course, maybe even Guardian Chimera, whatever the case might be, you can still compete. It's just going to be really, really tough. And for that reason, I didn't feel like I could make the list, but I did want to shout it out regardless because you can play Branded on a budget in this format here. It's just going to be a little bit more challenging. But with that being said, let's jump into our number 5 deck being Superheavy Samurai. I think Superheavy Samurai is a fantastic option in this format if you want to play on a budget. Now, obviously the deck gets exponentially better if you do have a higher level of spending power because you can afford a copy of SP Little Knight, which is amazing in the strategy. With that being said, the Superheavy Samurai engine is incredibly budget right now because of all the reprints the deck has seen, and of course because of the rarity of all the cards. The most expensive card you have to play in the deck is going to be Superheavy Samurai Prodigy Rikoshi, which is going to be the starter for the strategy. This card is honestly insane and on its own can create one of the best end boards in Yu-Gi-Oh today. I did say this was the most expensive mandatory card to play in the deck, but it is only $5 a copy at the high end, which is honestly not bad for a super rare card right now. You do have to play a couple other cards to kind of cement the strategy and make it a lot stronger, the most important of which being Big Bang K and the Motorbike. You also want to play 3 copies of Soul Piercer, which is one of the craziest cards in the strategy because it's just not once per turn. It's an insane card to help you build your board. But the reason why the deck is so good is because of the amount of negates it puts up pretty easily. You can very easily get access to a copy of Baronne de Fleur on your side of the field, which is really nice. Of course, you also have Bestial Dispatter, which is an option if you want to go down that line, but it does bring your budget a little bit above the $100 price point that I want to talk about. But one of the most important cards in the extra deck that we have not talked about yet that is very expensive and you kind of have to play is going to be Excel Synchro Stardust Dragon. This card is about a $30–$35 card right now, and you pretty much have to play it because it allows you to get into your Baronne de Fleur lines really easily. But there's one thing that's really important to mention when we talk about Superheavy Samurai. It's the fact that the deck just can't play any spells and trap cards. It's part of the actual requirement for the engine. They just can't have any spells and traps in the graveyard to be able to activate their effects, which is really important because a lot of the time, the best spell cards in the game today are pretty pricey. Something like Triple Tactics Thrust, of course the Wanted package, and so on. So what do you do instead? Well, you play hand traps. and you play a lot of them. The deck does have a pretty big weakness to Droll and Lockbird, which is one of the better hand traps in the format today. I know it's not the best card against all these Snake Eye and Fire King boards, but it does have a lot of utility against those strategies depending on the hand. But either way, if you can manage to play around Droll and Lockbird, or you don't lose to Droll and Lockbird because of a random hand, or more importantly, your opponent doesn't have it, then this deck can compete with so many others in the format today. It is a fantastic option if you're on a budget. My number 4 deck and my number 3 deck, honestly, you can kind of flip-flop back and forth because it really depends on what you like more than the other one. So these next two here, I want to say they are tied, but I'm going to start off with talking about Exosister. Now listen, Exosister is a deck that's been around for a little while now. Anytime there's a really big, heavy graveyard reliant deck, the deck kind of just pops up again. We saw it happen with tier format and we're seeing it happen again now. The deck can play a good amount of non-engine, which is really solid, but more importantly than that, its engine itself is also really good at stopping anything, or not stopping, but being able to just annoy decks that would want to do something from the graveyard. If you move anything from the graveyard, you move a copy of a level 1 fire out of your graveyard off of Floowandereeze's effect, well, copies of your Exosister monsters are going to trigger to allow you to link up, or not link up, Xyz up, rank up into these Exosister Xyz, which are really, really good. The Exosister monsters are really strong. You look at something like a copy of Michaelis, which can banish a card from the field or the graveyard, which can be really nice to get rid of the random copies of cards that are really important in the Fire King Snake Eye matchup. And of course, something like, I think it's Caspatel, which is also a really good one at being able to just prevent them from summoning from the graveyard in general, which the deck kind of just does naturally. It stops cards like Princess, it stops cards like Ambler Whale, it stops the Flamberge Dragon, and so on and so forth. This is a really important card in the strategy today, and when you pair all these powerful Xyz monsters with, of course, the best hand trap in the game today in Dimension Shifter, you get a really solid deck that competes against some of the better decks in the format. Now, the deck does have an issue with consistency, of course. You really want to make sure you find something like Exosister Martha, which can be done pretty easily with the strategy, but doesn't always happen. And when it doesn't happen, the end board for the strategy becomes really lackluster, and honestly, without Martha or Shifter, and a lot of the time both of them, the deck just can't compete at the level a lot of decks would want to today. But the reason why I have it above something like Superheavy Samurai is because the strategy itself can play a lot of non-engine and a lot of hand traps that would be in the form of back row, which are really good in the format today. I should also mention that cards like Returnia and Vadis are also really good in Yu-Gi-Oh! Today. Cards like Returnia obviously being able to give you a chance to Xyz on your opponent's turn or just banish a card is great, and of course Vadis being able to summon out an Exosister from the deck is also really nice. Unfortunately though, for consistency reasons, the deck does have to play a small spirit engine of Sakitamas and Aratamas, and usually this 4 to 5 card engine itself isn't that big of a deal. It boosts consistency a lot, but the problem with it is going to be that it means you cannot play as much non-engine as you would like to in the format, and with a deck right now that's as low power as Exosister is compared to something like Fire King or Snake Eye, you really want to make sure you have this powerful non-engine to be able to deal with that strategy. The only real expensive card in the strategy is going to be Exosister Magnifica, which is like a $15 card right now, but everything else is like $2, tops $3 at that point, which is really good. And the deck can play some really unique cards as well, like something like Dimensional Fissure, which is a really awesome card against Fire King and Snake Eye in the format today. I mentioned it earlier, but our number 4 deck was Exosister, but in reality that was really a tie for our number 3 spot, because these two decks here, while they are very, very different in the way they play and what they're weak to, this next deck is going to be Dark World. Now, Dark World is a really awesome option in the format today. It does lose to a lot of really common cards in the format right now, though, being Dimension Shifter and of course Droll and Lockbird. Now, the reason why it's not that big of a deal is because if you go first, a lot of the time, your opponent may not get a chance to play the game, which is going to be, honestly, a little unfortunate a lot of the times, but still really good right now. Now, of course, we also have to talk about the fact that there are so many fire decks in the format today, meaning Dimension Shifter is not going to be in their decks. So that means it's one of the bigger blow cards against Dark World that's just not going to see play. And of course, Droll and Lockbird, while it is seeing a lot of play, it's seeing a bit more play inside decks right now than what I originally anticipated going into this format. One of the reasons why Dark World is such a good deck right now is because on so many cards in this strategy, you don't see the words once per turn anywhere. Some cards are soft once per turns, but almost none of them are hard onces at all, which means you can constantly recycle back resources with the effects of something like a Grappa or a Rainbow. You can constantly discard cards like Silva to gain advantage, and Cerulli to be able to then discard additional cards like the Silva to be able to rip cards out of your opponent's hand. Basically, having access to a Dark World engine online, at the peak of its powers, this deck here can go absolutely crazy and just rip out an opponent's entire hand and just win the game on the spot. There are so many amazing cards in this strategy, including of course Dark Corridor, the deck's Rhoda. We have the Gates of Dark World, the Field Spell, which is an amazing card and is not a hard once per turn, and there's also going to be of course the Grapha Fusion, which is a great option to be able to summon out and make sure that you have a way to turn on your engine again during your opponent's turn while getting you what is essentially an Omni Negate. And I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but Card Destruction is one of the most insane cards in this strategy because because you get to chain block so many really nice cards, including the danger monsters and of course your Dark World cards. And of course, the deck also has a lot of really unfair tools at its disposal. You have obviously the Silva hand loop, which is really nice, that's not once per turn, but you can also easily play cards like Skill Drain and of course Eradicator Epidemic Virus, which are awesome cards in this format. Our number 2 deck on this list might be one that you didn't expect to see on this list because honestly it's a pretty new strategy, at least it's been updated quite significantly since the last time we saw it. And that deck is going to be Raidraptors. Now, Raidraptors are an awesome deck that is extremely consistent, can play a good amount of non-engine, and can play through a lot of the different hand traps in this format to create an insane and scary end board. The deck itself, though, is an extremely complicated combo deck with a lot of different varying lines that can alter what the end board will look like. But essentially, a lot of the time what you're trying to do is resolve Rising Rebellion Falcon, which is an insane Towers-type boss monster that is unaffected by other cards' effects, can do damage, and is an absolutely massive monster. The deck can also function completely normally without a copy of SP Little Knight, which is extremely important considering that the fact that SP is the best card in the game today. Now, I do want to quickly talk about why budget decks are so important in this format, and the reason why is because not every single player that has access to all the money in the world to be able to spend on a really expensive deck is going to be as good as they need to be to play the game successfully. If you're a player that's on a budget, you may need to just spend a little bit more time to be able to analyze the deck, learn the deck, get comfortable with it and everything, and learn the combos as much as you possibly can, and learn the different situations to be able to play the deck optimally. Raidraptor is one of those decks where you don't need to spend a ton of money, but you need to spend a lot of time learning the deck itself, learning the combos, planning things out, learning how to play around certain cards. And Raidraptor, once you can do those things, the deck itself has a massive ceiling, so just keep that in mind. I want to talk in more detail about Raidraptor, so come back in just a few days for my ultimate guide on Raidraptor and how the deck works itself and how good the strategy really is. You're going to learn so much from that video. But with that being said, our number 1 budget deck for this post-Phantom Nightmare format is going to be Floowandereeze. Yeah, I think a lot of you probably saw this one coming here. Floowandereeze, as far as a shifter deck, is the best one that you can get for less than $100. And honestly, you can probably get this deck for less than $50. It is that good of a strategy and that low cost. The deck itself has no real restrictions outside of exactly you can't special summon monsters really, and honestly that's not that bad of a restriction because the Floowandereeze cards are just insane. The deck itself is a control style deck with cards like Robina, Eglin, and of course Map to be able to get you 2 copies of M-Pen, your Ryza, and of course your copy of Apex Avian, which are going to be your main forms of interruption for this strategy. Floowandereeze also has a good amount of room for non-engine and cards that can just boost this consistency. When we look at cards that'll boost consistency, we of course have cards like Pot of Duality, Pot of Prosperity, you have New Swallow's Cowrie, and of course Advent of Adventure, which can all do the same thing for you. But the deck can definitely fit in a good amount of non-engine as well, including cards like Dimension Shifter and of course Droll and Lockbird, even though the 2 cards do kind of clash a little bit, but you can also add in cards like Macrocosmos, which are really solid right now, and of course Dimension Fissure. Now there are of course 2 more cards I want to talk about with regards to this deck. The first is going to be Unexplored Winds. This card here is honestly really nice at tributing opponents' cards, which can get rid of some really annoying cards that are including back row or monsters as well. And on top of that, because you don't special summon ever, you're able to really effectively play around some annoying cards your opponent might have. And of course, the last card, the most important card outside of maybe Robina or Shifter, is going to be Harpy's Feather Storm. This card is crazy. Now, it is one of the strongest cards in the deck for sure, basically preventing your opponent from activating effects, which is really nice. But the fact that you want to play this deck, you may want to add in a copy of Triple Tactics Thrust, which can bring this deck from maybe a $40, $50 deck to a $100 deck pretty quickly. Out of all the decks I've mentioned so far, the only one that's actually topped consistently in this format today is going to be Floowandereeze, and that is saying something considering that all these decks I've mentioned already are also really solid. And there you have it. That is my top 5 best budget decks for the post-Phantom Nightmare competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. Now let me know down in the comments below, what are your thoughts on the video itself, and did I miss any budget decks that you would have liked to see on this list? If you made it this far in the video, then you must have enjoyed it, so make sure to smash the like button. If this video hits 250 likes, then I'll bring you a deck profile for any one of the top 5 best budget decks I've shown you about today. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter and join the Discord server, both are linked down in the description, and of course guys, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers and we cannot get there without your help. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.